Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene. And today he's given me a topic which he hasn't decided on a title. Something about tabletop control. Tabletop controlling the table.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. We try to keep the title short, but this one's kind of a tongue twister. What does that mean, right? Control. It's like,
This has nothing to do with in-game control. This is just game control.
right, keeping the mood, the vibe. What else? The
We've talked
tone about the table.
Right. We've talked about before about players who talk while you're playing, or everybody wants to visit before you start the game.
Well, there's all kinds of things that could mess up the vibe of the table that you're trying to create when you're a GM, right? Usually, this means like if you're trying to run a moody, dark mystery game, maybe involving vampires or werewolves. And so there's a different vibe than playing a superhero game or playing kids on bikes. There's a more happy-go-lucky kind of a cheery game, or like Tales from the Loop.
Right.
Though even though those games can get a little bit heavy and have serious moments and serious tones, it's not as lighthearted. I mean, it's more lighthearted than, let's say, a dark, brooding mystery game or vampire game. Let's just throw it out there because the 90s were full of vampire games that were, emo, and they wore trench coats and dark clothes all the time.
Okay, Mr. Stereotyper.
I'm just saying that, yeah, that is a stereotype, but also that invokes a certain kind of tone to the table if you're playing those kind of games. And you want to control that tone and not have players joking around in the middle of the game, because it might ruin the atmosphere for not only the GM but other players who may not be joking around and might want to get in the mood of the game.
I can see that. I can also see that there's a lot of tension at the table, or there's something
There's
really serious going on. Someone's going to break that tension by saying something silly just to bring people out of that moment
that nervous laugh.
Yeah.
Right. That does happen.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but if it is continual and interrupting the flow of the game, I can see where the GM might go, okay, no, I need you to be serious while we're playing this. To which
Yes.
I'd go, okay, we're playing a role-playing game. Serious is not necessarily what's going to happen.
Right. I was thinking it came to mind. I don't know why it came to mind, but I was thinking when you're playing a serious investigative game, right? A Mutant City Blues or something like that or let's say Blade Runner.
I know that our Friday night group, when we play your mystery games as your play testers for things that you want us to figure out when you're going to run a new game like Blade Runner,
right?
We investigate a lot, and a lot of times we run into dead ends, so we make jokes.
I don't remember that, but I understand those. Making jokes is different than disrupting the game with joking banter. Let's say I'm running Blade Runner when it's always raining, it's always nighttime, right? And it's funny. I just read, I saw a clip on why.
Is it acid rain that's coming down?
Well, no, it is actually kind of acidy rain. But the director, I can't believe, Ridley Scott, the reason he shot in the dark at night and why it was always raining. It was a kind of interesting little side thing, but I'll talk about that later. But let's say you're running that kind of game, and the players think they're like Scooby-Doo. Well, I'm gonna have a Scooby snack while he investigates, and then the other person's going, "Are you Scooby or whatever?" I forget Scooby's the dog, right?
Yes.
Shaggy's the guy, right? And so they start going to something along those lines, and you're like, okay, it's funny, but if they keep that up, those players, then you're like, okay, you're kind of messing things up. You're messing my game, dudes. That can happen, especially if the players aren't in the mood to play that kind of game. So I think, what can you do as a GM to not have that happen at your table? I think in those situations, the GM can get frustrated. And if the GM is frustrated, then you as a GM is frustrated, then you're not going to run a very good game. You're going to get however you handle frustration, it's not good, right? For most people. Another thing is, if you're frustrated and let's say you have 5 players and 2 of them are goofing off like that, the other 3 people are not going to be happy about it either because they came to play the game that you put out and not this Saturday 80s cartoon simulation game. What do you do to prevent that to happen or as it's happening? So first thing is, as a GM, you all have to tell them what your game is about and what your expectations are as a GM. This is the kind of game I want to run, but this is whatever. Describe your game as much as possible and describe that this is the mood I'm going for. And if you're going to show up to my table, that is the game that we're going to play. And I think most people will take that honestly and say, oh, okay, yeah, I can do that. Or, no, I don't feel like playing that kind of a dark game. Whatever game it is, it could be like, for example, I suggested we play Midnight, right? This is a world where Sauron won, that kind of idea, where the dark evil lord won and the world is in chaos. But you are a group of a small band of rebels trying to break the hold of that evilness.
And I said, go ahead and play it, but not with me.
Exactly. So you're right away. But let's say you weren't as strong-willed as you were. You're like, oh, okay, I'll go along. And through the whole time, you're like, well, do we have to really go do that? Or, you know what I mean? The vibe is different. You're like not into it. And so you're not intentionally sabotaging the game or the mood, but you're doing that. And so what happens? You're just going to have to be eliminated. No. So you have a talk with you. Okay, do you really want to play this game?
No, I don't.
No. Then some people will, but some people in groups will go, well, I really want to play.
I just don't want to play that game.
Right. And so there's that discussion that happens. And I think that's a good thing. So having players know the expectations of your game is very important. And that they agree to it, right? There might be some people, and as a GM, you really got to be aware of people's body language and how they act or react to that kind of situation where you're telling them, this is the kind of game I want to run. And you can tell sometimes people are like, they don't have to tell you sometimes that's not the kind of game they want to play in.
My advice is if a GM tells you this is the kind of game he wants to run and you don't want to play in it, tell him or her. Right. I don't want to, that doesn't sound fun to me. I don't want to play in a world where Sauron won.
And so we have this situation where that does happen. It doesn't happen enough, I think. Some people will just remain quiet going, well, okay, I'll go along to get along, that kind of thing. And then they show up and then they're like, oh, no, this is not working. And they don't want to upset the group or they don't want to upset the GM. And they're just sitting there going, well, and then that leads me to my other point is when a player is bored, they might do things to upend the apple cart. I don't know how long it's been since people had apple carts, but it does happen where people act that way because they're bored and they don't want to be in that situation. They don't want to be playing that game, but they're doing it because, well, Jimmy and Sally are also playing, and my best friend Ken is playing. My husband is in the game, and all kinds of things are running the game. All kinds of things are that pressure to be there, but then you're like, well, you're not really interested, and you're kind of bored. And sometimes people who are bored will do weird things in the game. That has happened in my games too. I'm like, what the heck's wrong with this person? And sometimes, and now if it's your home group, you can identify people and you're like, well, they're acting odd, right? And sometimes there's people who play like that no matter what. And then you encounter them at game store games or at a game con. And they're just like people who just like upsetting things, throwing curveballs at the GM and thinking, oh, how are they going to handle this? And I tend to stay away from those kind of morons and jerks. And if they're at a game table at a convention, you have to deal with that. And there's all kinds of different ways you can deal with that kind of person. Give them more spotlight. Try to get them to get in the game. And a lot of it sometimes is just having them do things in the game and then And then sometimes the other players will like, hey, why are you acting like that? And they'll help you control the table, but they're like, oh, your character's not going to do that kind of stuff.
That usually doesn't happen.
Usually doesn't happen, correct.
Although I was at a gaming table where two people were goofing off and being silly. And one of the other players basically told them to stop.
Yes.
The GM didn't tell him to stop, but the other player was like, what are you doing? You need to stop now.
Yes. Yeah. And so sometimes the people who are playing with you or playing in the game, they don't want to upset them. They don't want to like mess up their fun. But when other people are being disrupted, then they can like.
It depends on who it is, because if you know all the people
Right.
and you play with them before, then you feel more comfortable telling them stuff like that. And that was this case, right?
Correct. I think when you're playing games and you find yourself in that situation, it's very hard as a GM.
Sorry. Let's just go.
Sometimes as a GM or as just a person, you find it hard to confront people who are being disruptive. And I think that's one of the jobs as a GM, because you already have all kinds of things on your plate. Let's lump and put something else on your plate. Is you have to be able to make sure that the people at the table, everybody is going to have a good time. Now, if you have people disrupting that good time, then you have to step up and say, whatever you're doing, whatever the situation is, it needs to stop or change, or what's going on? Are you guys not interested in playing this game? Do we not want to play this game? Is it not fun for you? If it isn't, then you can either leave or we can stop playing and play something else. And that really sucks, because some other people might be willing to play that game. Or you might say, yeah, they're not really interested in playing this game. Or today they're just in a weird mood. They don't want to play that game. And it's tough, and I think it's hard. But I think because you're the GM, it really falls upon you sometimes. A lot of stuff it does.
I think there's ways to avoid that situation. I believe there are ways to avoid such a situation, especially if it's like a group that meets every 2 weeks, or these are the people you've been playing with your whole life. You have to give them time to chit chat when they come in. You have to realize that after a certain amount of time, people are going to need a break so they can talk to each other. And sometimes that's just the way it is, right?
Oh no, definitely. That's one thing that I had in my notes is this is it. Role playing is a social game, right? People get together and socialize. It's a social game, so you're socializing with other people. And sometimes, like if you meet not so regularly, or the distance, the time between games is a little bit more than every week, you just have to catch up on what's going on in their lives, and you asking them. They're your friends usually, and so you're asking about how the kids, how's work, blah blah blah, and all this other stuff that happens. And then if you add food to the mix and drinks, then there's that getting up and eating and talking about the latest events or what you've been up to. And as a GM, you just can't like ignore the fact that these people are friendly to each other and know each other and are friends, and you can't just jump into a game without having that moment, that period of time of socialization. Now, it's different. Like I was just thinking about even in a con game, right? We just got back from Kubla Khan this weekend, and I was running a game, and then we took a break after 3.5 hours, and it was like a 15-minute break. People went to go get eat, and they came back, and when they came back, they were chit-chatting about stuff, about other games, and some of these people didn't know each other, right? There was the people who did in my game, but there was people who didn't know each other talking about different things that's happening. And I have to let that happen, right? Even though I'm like, oh, it's getting close to the time I said we were going to get back to playing. Everybody left and they came back. And then when they came back, it was pretty close to when we started playing, like a couple minutes. But I let them talk a little bit longer because they had discussions to talk out, right? So then after like 5 minutes, I go, and I still use this in almost every table. I say, okay, guys, let's get back to reality. And it was funny because some people laughed. They're like, they got it, right? Oh, this is reality. We're playing a role-playing game, as non-reality as that is. But they all settled down. They sat down. They quieted down. The personal conversations ended, and they were back in the game. And I think that is what you need. You need something. For me, it's a phrase, back to reality, which I think is kind of funny. And it causes people to go from socializing mode to, oh, we're playing a game mode. Then slowly they get into the characters as the game progresses from that moment of everybody socializing and taking a break and having something to eat or drink to start playing. Slowly the world of the game
comes back.
And reality goes away, and now we're playing in ancient Rome, hunting down supernatural things.
When I was researching this topic, which he's always sending me off to research stuff, I came across this group who the GM said, what I do is I have like a talking stick. One side is red and one side is green. So when the green side is up on the table, everyone needs to be in character. And if somebody has to tell something or in the middle of the game needs to say something out of game, they have to take the stick and turn it over to the red side, which I thought was hilarious.
That's pretty regimented. And I'm not sure.
If you could get your players to be that regimented or that
trained
to do that, I would be amazed.
I think it's an excellent idea. I don't know how it would work in our group.
I know that Felipe is always talking about, you want to be in character. Stay in character. Yes. Well, not always, but like...
as much as possible.
Yeah, as much as possible. And I can see that, but a lot of times I just don't experience it at the gaming table as much. When you get with a group of people, there's all kinds of dynamics going on, right? And you're having fun playing the game, but sometimes something reminds you of something and you need to tell your friend that this happened, right? And you don't want to go, oh, I'm going to have this side conversation because I need to tell Kathy something.
Yes, I remember I think you mentioned that before a long time ago, the talking stick. No?
I may have, but I just read it.
It sounds familiar.
Yesterday.
I think it was like a talking stick. I don't remember the left and the green and red side. That is actually a brilliant idea for people who are having a hard time staying in character, or as
a visualization on the table, right?
And as a GM, I think if you really want people to be in character, that's an excellent way of doing it. And if the players are on board.
You know how GMs do things where you can use clothespins or something to do the initiative.
Yeah.
Well, you could have a sign at the top of it that says that you turn one way that says in character and one way that says out of character or something like that.
I was thinking...
Saul usually just says to the player when they say something that's not in character, or he goes, "Is that what are you saying that in game?" And then everybody will become more serious and go, "Oh no, that wasn't in game."
Oh, that says your character saying that, and they're like, "Oh no," or yes, depending on what the issue is. That whole idea reminds me of, I don't know if you have Bubba Gumps around where you live, but here there's Bubba Gumps, and if you want some waiter to stop, they have these license plates.
Yes.
It says, what does it say?
Stop and go.
Stop and go, right?
I think. And one is red and one is green.
One is red and one is green, and then you turn it over to the green side, and they can just bypass you and not have to worry about your table. But you put on the red side, it says stop. They'll stop and ask you what you need and stuff. I think it's kind of...
Maybe that's where that GM got that idea.
It sounds a lot like it. Though those license plates are noisy, so I mean...
So that's probably not what you want to use.
Yeah, the talking stick kind of thing is kind of cool. So I was thinking, another thing is, if you're trying to run a serious game, as a GM and stuff, you have to play by your own rules, right? You can't be saying, oh, I'm going to run a serious, moody game, and then be cracking jokes left and right, and then expect the players not to join you in this way of playing, right, where you're goofing off and being funny, which was kind of funny because it kind of brought up a conversation I had with one of my friends. We were watching Romeo Must Die, a movie with Jet Li, and he mentioned he liked the movie, but there was one element of the movie that he didn't like because it was a serious movie. It's about the different groups of people trying to take over Oakland waterfront. It's an action movie, and it has some serious... and throughout the movie, there's this character played by Anthony Anderson, I believe is the character. His name is Maurice, and he's just this big bumbling fool, right? He's just sort of a comedic element to this whole movie, and he's the only one in that movie that's comedic in that sense, where he kind of plays the fool from the beginning all the way to the end of the movie. And for my friend, he said that kind of ruined the movie for him, because it was like odd to see them. Of course, the character didn't make sense because this guy was part of a crime syndicate kind of group, and he said, "What person who's in the underworld business would put him in charge of anything?" And yet here he was in charge of the lieutenants, or the not the lieutenants. He was like a lieutenant for all these other henchmen.
And
right?
so you're telling this story because
as a GM, you don't want to be throw that comedic thread in a game when you're trying to be a dark, moody, investigative game, or a serious crime drama, right? You're playing underworld type people, or your group is going to your cops and you're going against underworld type people. And here's this guy who works for the underworld and is in charge of 4 or 5, 6 mooks, and he's like a total goofball. You're like, okay, what's going on here? I mean, you could make it that he's like the person's son and doesn't take things seriously, but that wasn't the case. He was just a henchman, one of the henchmen, but was kind of in charge of other henchmen. It didn't really work well, and it put my friend out of the movie, right? It put him out of like if it was a role playing game, it would throw him out of the whole world
of the immersion.
The immersion, right, of the game. And so I think as a GM, if you're going to have rules, like not rules, but expectations of the people playing, you have to follow your own expectations and lead by example is what I'm saying as a GM.
I understand what you're saying. I also think that as a GM, you might have to lower your expectations of the table.
That's true. Also know who you're running for, right? I mean, I ran a game for my son and his friends and our friend Steve for quite a long time, and I didn't expect them to play Arthurian.
Well, they were kids too, like yes. Between 10 and now 20. But when you're running for kids, you really have to lower your expectations about in-game, out-of-game stuff, right?
Right.
Because they're learning.
Right, and I didn't expect them to play some Shakespearean tragedy type of game. It was this fun, kill monsters, take their stuff. Unfortunately, I made murder hobos out of them, but it happens. And it was a lighthearted kind of game in a way. I didn't expect them to be in character all the time. I didn't expect them to talk in a certain voice. They basically were there just to chuck dice and
have fun.
That's a different table than, let's say, adults where my expectations can be a little bit higher. But at the same time, you can't have outrageous expectations. Like, always be talking in character. Everything you say at the game table is your character saying it. Those are some
GMs have that rule.
Some GMs have that rule, but it's very difficult to enforce. And I've never seen a GM. I've never played with a GM that enforced those kind of rules and was really draconian about it.
I haven't either.
Yeah, even and I played in numerous con games, and where people try to, right? They try to have this expectation, and the closest way or the best way of doing it, I think, and the closest GMs get to it is if they're really into the world or the setting, and they're just like they overwhelm you with their enthusiasm, right? So you're like, oh wow, this guy's really like. I played in a Aliens game where we played Yakuza in space, right? The Yakuza also went into space and were in underworld in space in the genre of Aliens. Weyland Yutani was around and stuff. And so when he was talking about the background, you could tell he was really enthusiastic. You could tell that he was excited about running this game. And that just kind of fed to us going, okay, we're going to try our best to be these Yakuza thugs. And that's what we were. And it was really a good game. And we all played and we all had a lot of fun. And I think we all stayed in character as much as possible, which I think was pretty cool.
Okay.
So as a GM, you can control not control the table, but help the table stay in character, be immersed in that kind of environment if you show a lot of enthusiasm, even not a lot of knowledge, though this guy, he was very excited and very informative. I think his explanation went a little bit long, but it was okay because, like I said, he was really enthusiastic about the game he was about to run. So like, yeah, I bought in to that game, so I was ready to play that game. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, I was ready to play this Yakuza dude, Kenji, who a bad guy, but a faithful member of his lord, who's a lord.
I think that another way to get players to stay on topic, in game, whatever you want to call it,
right,
is to make sure that whatever's happening, you keep the flow going and saying, what are you doing? And then what are you doing? And expect them to be ready when you ask them what they're going to do, to be ready, right? And then if they're not ready, just go, okay, we'll go move on to somebody else, right? And you keep the flow going, so that alleviates the boredom that some players get waiting for their turn while somebody's looking up spells or trying to figure out, well, I think I want to try this, but I don't know if I can do that, and different kinds of things. Instead of just, it interrupts the flow of the table, right?
Right.
So if you want people to be playing and in the game needs to be moving.
Oh, definitely. I think if this GM did exactly that. He was going from character to character, and then the bad guys would sometimes be in between, and he just kept the game moving. He even skipped somebody. I forget who it was. He goes, "What are you doing?" And the guy goes, "Well, I'm thinking about. Okay, I'll get back to you later." And he just kept going, and it was like the flow was so quick because things were happening so fast, especially in that game, Aliens, which is a Year Zero engine, so it's a really easy dice pool game. You're just chucking dice. You're seeing how the results are, and the scene just kept moving and moving and moving, and there was no time to be bored. And he didn't skip people, of course. It's kind of hard to skip people, and he would just move from character to character, from the bad guys in our case, and we were the good guys, even though how good could we be? We were underworld people or mafia type people. But the game just flowed really well, and because he knew his rules really well, it was just like he didn't have to look anything up. It just flowed well, so there was no time for us to be bored or to like start thinking about, oh, what am I going to eat tomorrow? No, we were in the game and stayed in the game until we took a break, and after the break we came right back, and it was like it just kept flowing. And I think you're right. I think if you, as a GM, are keeping the players engaged in the game, whether it's in combat or just investigating and stuff, I think that's a great way to keep the players immersed in the world that you're playing in.
And if somebody wants to look up how something works or wants to question a rule, I think that you should say, okay, you look that up. We're moving on to the next person.
Right. Definitely.
We'll get back to you.
Yeah, stopping the game for somebody to look something up is kind of it breaks you out of that immersion, and also kind of interrupts the flow of the game if it's a quick flowing game.
Right.
Yeah. I think as a GM, you have to have all these ideas in place for your table to flow well. And keeping the people immersed in your game is preventing them from being bored. Make sure that they're on board with the game that you want to run, and make sure that they're bought in. Because some people might say, "Well, okay, I'll play," and you could tell some people's not interested by their body language, by the way they talk. Are you really interested in playing this game? Talk to that person or email them. I wasn't sure if you were really interested in playing this game. If you're not, maybe we could play a different game or whatever. Have that conversation, because you don't want that to come out during play where the person's bored or not really that interested in your game or in that type of game. And you shouldn't take it critically like, oh, you're wounded. How dare you not want to play my game? And you're better off as a GM having somebody who's uninterested in not playing your game than somebody who's uninterested in playing your game, thinking that you're going to win them over with your fantastic GM and adventure skills, right? Building skills. No, you don't want that player in your game because you don't want them to disrupt your game. And that's what will happen, because if they're really not liking the idea of the game, or they're not going to buy into the immersion, they're going to get bored, and then they're just going to like, oh, have a side chat with the person next to them, and you don't want that.
And I think that my advice would be maybe you need to lower your expectations just a little bit on what's going to happen during your game. Usually you know the group of people that you're playing with, and that's why games last so long sometimes, because people have to stop and chat with each other. People are going to want to eat. They're going to want to ask you questions, look up rules, different things like that. And as the GM, unless it's a convention game where you have a certain amount of time, well, most games you only have a certain amount of time to play, but lower your expectations on how in-game people are going to be, right?
Yes.
You can have high expectations, but you're just going to end up being disappointed in your players, right? They're not doing it the way I want them to.
Yeah, it's tough. And I know GMs out there, they put in a lot of work in their game, and they want this level of immersion for themselves, but we are not professional actors. We are just people who like playing in a good storytelling game. And I think you're right. Having those high expectations, better off to have reasonable expectations about how games really work and how people are.
Yes.
And they're not everybody's going to be super enthusiastic about your game like you are.
You might find a group that is like always in character and ready to go at a moment's notice, but I haven't found that group yet.
No, very hard to find that group.
So there you go. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene.
And you have a good day.